Is tape rolling?
At some point, I have to go back to my school and show up for work.
Okay. 30 seconds, I assume? Okay, don't worry about it. I'll just look at the monitor. We'll start with the wide shot as I'm talking. We'll come in and so on. Oh, Clark. Koli Clark.
Clark.
I was calling you Koli. It's Kolia.
It's Koli.
Koli?
Yeah, the name is Koli. Koli.
K-O-L-I.
They misspelled it yesterday.
No, it's always misspelled. The slaves didn't know how to spell. They did the best they could
Koli.
with their names. It's a family name, going way back.
Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. This is part 2 of a discussion on economics, a discussion on the game of Monopoly, and we're joined on this part 2 with Koli Clark. So thank you for joining me.
And thank you for having me. I haven't been down this rabbit hole but once. So
Right.
glad to be back down here again.
So what did you think about the show we just completed with Cay from the Henry George School? Cay Hehner's from the director of the Henry George.
I
and
sat
Carl
in
Pearson.
amazement listening to the discussion, and at the same time recollecting two sisters who live out from Albany, New York, in a small town, one of whom introduced me to the landlord-tenant game. Must have been about 15 years ago now.
So you know that game?
Yes. I mean,
Wow.
I knew the people who worked on the game. Well, I knew the people who worked on the biography of the sister who developed the game.
The lady that
developed
Cay
the
was
game.
telling
Lisa
us.
McGee. Yeah.
Lisa McGee?
Yes. And these two women have been doing this research. I don't know what the status of it is. They were hoping to get a book out, and I said that was many years ago. It may be out now, and quietly out. I'm sure it would be. Parker Brothers would be happy to have it quietly out. But they live up there in that little solar house on 10 acres of land, and we used to go out and we would beg them to let us come. I was working at the college, so college students would come over and we would plant a little garden there. It was difficult digging in the rock. I learned the difference between New York rock and Mississippi soil. The struggle continues. But we really enjoyed it, so we would come in and they would talk with us about this landlord-tenant game, and that's when I picked up Progress and Poverty, because the landlord-tenant game was associated with Progress and Poverty, and because the clubs that developed, and these clubs were nationwide.
Yes.
And some of them were black clubs. For example, Du Bois, William B. Burghardt Du Bois, was a member of one of the landlord-tenant clubs. So that there was a consciousness that was evolving, and I think probably one of the most, and it was touched on here, I mean, in many, many ways, and certainly in depth when we began to talk about the game and the struggle with the legal side of this piece, the first lawsuits being actually filed by the original owner in the early 1930s, and of course, not one. Actually, they worked out something with her. I can't remember what it was, but some small piece worked out with her.
Excuse me, did you know about these lawsuits in the 30s?
We've had histories of various things, and some of it is incomplete, and records are missing, so we weren't able to fill in everything.
That's right. Because I'm not even too sure that you can fill it in, because it seemed to me that they worked out a deal with her, a small deal, like an aside deal where she got nothing, literally nothing. And
here's one penny for you.
Hey, it's Monopoly, baby.
And one penny for your lawyer.
And the folk who actually took the game, of course, got the deal with Parker Brothers.
Right, Darrow.
So when you go back and you begin to look at this, and I was listening to the discussion, and I was thinking about the time period, because I think that we often forget that this time period in which these monopolies developed is a time period in which the deals are being worked out in terms of transfer and labor. Africans were being transferred from the ownership by individuals to the ownership by the state. We've seen at the same time the evolution of the laws growing around the Africans who have just come out of this enslavement.
Slow down again. You're saying slaves were owned by individuals?
Yes.
And then they started to be owned by the state?
Yeah, the transfer. The end of slavery is a transfer. The emancipation emancipates you from. Oftentimes when we look at the modern word emancipation, we confuse it with the original word emancipation in the time, well, not the original, the time period of the 1860s. You're merely saying to owners, you no longer own this property, but now who does own it? Because the Africans are not free in that sense. So it's really not technically, the state actually takes on the ownership. So there's an attempt on the part of the Congress to transfer that ownership to the individual. And that happens in a number of ways. You get the Civil Rights of 1865 Act of 1865.
You mean transfer the rights to the individual persons so they're not slaves, right? Yeah. That's kind of where we're at today, because with these acquisitions and mergers,
that's right,
people's jobs go along with the trade.
So we're jobs.
Yeah.
Hold on a minute. So you get this transfer. So you get the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Is it 1865 or 66? I'm confused which one. That actually gives us ownership of ourselves. You now own yourself. You can buy property. You can own your children. You can sue in court and so forth. But there's that series of laws. The 13th Amendment, of course, is the first, and then you get the Civil Rights Acts, and then you get the 14th Amendment, which is the amendment that's really key here, because it's through the 14th Amendment that these rising businesses, which are en route to becoming monopolists, are given rights as individuals. So giving the business the right of individuals in its own right certainly gave it the power to begin to operate in a monopolistic way, but you have to do some other things too, because you got to handle labor. So the wars are created, the wars between Africans and women, the wars between Africans and labor, because the Africans have, after all, been the primary stock for labor. They were the skilled technicians. They were also the common laborers within the plantation system. And that was a part of the reason why you pushed for a civil war. You wanted to get a civil war, so that you.
How would Henry George view the slavery situation of ownership of land? Because as a slave, you couldn't own land, right?
No, you couldn't. Well, there were slaves that owned land, but that was rare.
That was rare.
You could work out a deal with your master.
Well, then you essentially bought yourself out of slavery.
At a point, you buy yourself out, but you can make a deal where you can accumulate. Slaves make a contract with their owners. I'm working.
Indentured, probably the word indentured.
Well, no, not indentured. The word is that you make a deal with your owner. Your owner, you say, well, owner contracts you out anyway to work for somebody else.
Yeah.
So when the owner contracts you out to work for somebody else, let's say $15 are made, you get one. The owner gets 14. All right? So slaves got bright and they said, well, look, hey, I'll contract myself out. Owner, can I contract myself out? And you keep the $15, and whatever I make extra is mine. I said, yeah. That's how many Africans accumulated capital to be able to buy themselves out of slavery, all right?
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of little deals going on. It's very technical. I mean,
No, I'm thinking more about slavery as I see the country going in that direction. Everyone,
Yeah, I don't know that we left it.
Yeah.
Because I think we have to understand what I'm getting at is that the next thing you got to do is you got to tie labor down, and the only way you can tie this new emerging labor down, you got a lot of things. You got immigrants coming in, new immigrants. You got women screaming and yelling because they want rights. You got the Africans trying to get his rights defined and struggling to become a part of the system. You got the indigenous people who are being destroyed at the same time, Buffalo Soldiers, whatever else. But you get what is called the master-servant law for workers. I'm going to repeat that. It's the master-servant law.
For workers?
Yeah.
Did you know about that?
That is a labor law for the United States.
Did you
it's
know
entitled
that,
the master-servant law.
Well, there's a doctrine, a master-servant doctrine, a case law.
Yes,
I don't
which
know
means
of any
that out of
statute.
that comes the right of owners, of the owner of the business, to be able to hire and fire you, to fire you at will. That's a wonderful woman.
That's kind of the YouTube situation, I get this video up, that's where traffic is, that's where everybody now is trained to go or expecting to go, and there's no recourse.
Google has stopped the upload to Google. No more videos on Google itself. They've said it's all going to YouTube.
I feel a noose tightening, and YouTube you can't.
No, what you said about have we left slavery? That's what Henry George said. Henry George said we have fought the Civil War to get rid of ethnic slavery. We're still working on, officially we're over it, but we're still working on getting over the after effects.
That's right.
But what we haven't done at all, we have not overcome economic slavery. A lot of us are still wage slaves. What about the right to work? What about the right to, what we said, access to natural resources? The right to breathe. Hey, you're born. All human beings have a right to live. No one can live without natural resources. So all human beings have a right to natural resources. That's 1 and 1 is 2. And then we say, okay, we officially got rid of ethnic slavery, and we have economic slavery, and we have, 10% unemployment? If we use the measurements of the Great Depression period, we would have 20% unemployment.
I'm sure we have
20%. We're heading for 30% unemployment. What are we going to do with all these people in the street?
You know, Cay, I was thinking about the Henry George and the land thing, and you know, the way he writes about California, and it's so fresh, and you know. It seems if you are a country that's trying to establish yourself, if you're a government that's trying to establish yourself, you want to have people that's representing who you are. So there's a tendency to give the land away just to get it settled by people who will agree that you're the leader. Then afterwards, you may regret giving away too much and try to figure out ways to start roping it back. Does that make sense?
No, in the old days when people came over, it was supposedly the land of unlimited opportunities. The United States, when you came over from somewhere else, you had like feudalism, indenture, slavery, whatever, and people in the northern states, you didn't have slavery anymore at a certain point. So America to the world meant freedom. And you would say, this is the land of unlimited opportunities, but that was true only as long as there was free land. Homestead Act in 1862, that was against the natives, but it was an opportunity for the newcomers, for the people coming from across the ocean. But the moment in the 1880s when, so to speak, the last land was sold, and not by coincidence, Henry George wrote in that period, the last land was sold, and then everybody else had to pay rent. So in other words, before the Homestead Act meant you can have land for free as long as you cultivate it, and now there's no more land left. Now what Henry George did in the 1860s, first thing he wrote was, as a journalist, the first thing he wrote was an obituary on Abraham Lincoln. He said, this great man, and so on. Now Henry George saw over the period of 25 years how a fishing village, a couple of mud huts, San Francisco. It was a little nothing, some gold diggers and some drunks, some fishermen. How it developed over 25 years into a booming trade center that served the entire Pacific Rim. And in other words, he saw, like in accelerated motion, the history of civilization. And he had the brains to take it in and write a book about it. And there it is. And he said, if we allow monopolization of resources like air, water, and so on and so forth, and land, we're all going to be dead. And we're not out of slavery. We're not out of economic slavery. You're right.
And what they did with that, let me just make this, because he made a point about the government having set forth through Homestead Act this land for immigrants that are coming in. But let's be clear, that was not for Africans. Even though Africans are out of slavery.
It was discriminatory.
Let's get really clear about the African slavery thing, because I like to study the deepest stress I can to try to alleviate the problems. And the anti-Semitism that's growing up, and some of the websites are just horrifying. There's this one called ProThink, and I started to look at it, and what they were saying is that the slave trading started with financing the slave ships, and the claim is that they were Jewish. That's how they're saying.
Many of them might have been Jewish.
Now think about this. Why would they be so against the Jews? They were against the slave trading because as the slaves were brought in, land that one person couldn't utilize for himself, he could employ other people because they didn't have the technology that we have today. So you needed brute labor. So if you owned the labor, it was a way of sort of dominating that land. And I think that's what they're saying, the seeds of a lot of the great fortunes harken back to this slave trading. Because I was trying to figure out why such anti-Semitic language and concepts. So what I want to ask you, Carl, is knowledge a resource? And if you don't have access to that resource, in other words, you're getting misinformation that makes you hate when you shouldn't be hating. You're confused about who you're hating, and you're not.
In today's world, we have moved away from the monopolies being important in the area of manufacturing of products. We have come to a knowledge-based society where the rewards and the advances are basically predicated upon intellectual property advances, and that includes the storage, or the gathering, the storage, and the retrieval, and use of information. And if you have one company basically being the only effective company in that area, then it's a monopoly in an essential facility that we need in the world, and we have to be very concerned about that, because one person, as everyone knows, one corporation that lasts forever doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, doesn't have clothing. It has the protections that were given to live people under the Constitution to ensure that they got enough to eat, or supposedly, and the various protections for human beings are now given to the non-human beings.
Okay.
And we have exactly the situation, maybe not exactly, but the Mort Maine statutes that were directed back in the 1272 or something like that. The Mort Maine means the dead hand of the church. They were forbidden from owning real estate because they collected real estate. The church lasted forever, and once the church got the real estate, it never got out of the hands of the church, and they acquired all of the property that was available in due course. Corporations can do that now, and we need Mort Maine statutes to really bring corporations to an end at a certain point in their existence, I think.
The binary economists, I think, would take exception to some of that, I'm guessing. First of all, Norman Kurland was working with one of the popes, saying that even in the late 1800s, at least one of them or somebody saw that you needed to get capital ownership more diversified. The second thing is Robert Ashford talks about corporations as just being a useful tool. A hammer can certainly smash someone's head, but it can also build a house. What does Henry George say about corporations, or did he bring that up?
Well, if I understand Carl, if I understand you right, Carl, what you're basically saying, we are already in zombie rule and zombie land, and the zombies that are ruling us are the corporations.
Right.
And what Henry George says, Henry George is for private ownership of capital, but like Karl Marx, he was wary of this impersonality that comes in when you there's not one person or a few people running something, an entrepreneur. Or just a capitalist, somebody who wants to just drive the economy forward, not necessarily for himself or herself, but for everybody. But if you have this going over generations, it becomes impersonal. People are being replaced, and there's just this sort of ghost hanging over the world. We've seen it in Enron. We've seen it in all these financial corporations that have folded right now.
It's a computer gone wild, basically. No people. They have a system for creating assets, selling assets, and it's destroying the world. You can't stop it. Yeah.
There's a computer gone wild for breast cancer choices, and I got hooked up with one of these. I wasn't talking to a person, it was a machine.
Yes.
And they said, "Oh, I saw your video, great," and it was all slanted to holistic. Well, I knew they didn't see my video because my video was titled The Sacrifice of Abraham and Chemotherapy. So they just didn't see that video, and yet as fast as I could fire a response, I was getting a response back until finally I started to be very derogatory, "You damn machine," and somebody finally did call me, but it was it's part of a very elaborate PR method, and it's giving bum information. And it's going to hurt women.
But you know what I think about talking to
robots?
Whoever that is on the other end of the telephone.
Oh.
That half the time ask me the same question over and over again.
You when you're on the menu thing,
yeah,
push this and go there,
Not just that. You can, for example, I called my favorite phone company. I won't call their name out. I got that cell phone.
Sooner or later, it's going to be one anyway.
And do I want English? I said, yeah, I want English.
Yeah.
I get my English. Now they want to know why I'm calling, of course. And then they give me a string of choices. I take one of those choices. Now they ask it over and over again. I give an answer. And And then they ask it again. I mean, it goes on and on. It drives you nuts, this re-asking. But the whole fact that we as a people in the world have bought into exactly what George was opposed to, this notion of the ideology of progress. Mm-hmm. And the ideology of progress is that the development of the increase, America's increased imperialism, creation of the manufacturing base, bringing in people, I guess, new-looking houses and cars, and of course, electricity and da-da-da. So people see one thing, but they're hearing another, and that is that this is progress. So monopoly capitalism was progress. And the people bought into the ideology in the same way in which we buy into talking to nothing on the other end of the telephone. We go to machines to do business. We go in grocery stores, or people who lost their jobs in supermarkets, and
maybe it's not the job loss. It's what are we doing with the leisure time to figure out to get the real wealth.
Can I say something about job loss? I think if you want to understand Henry George, you have to go away from socialism, the socialist paradigm, and you have to go away from the capitalist paradigm, because we're being so bamboozled, we've been so brainwashed that it's like we can't think straight. We can't just see the most obvious thing. Capital in Henry George's world is just stored labor. It's yesterday's labor, last week's labor, last year's labor, what you have in stock, what you put away for a rainy day. It's not this financial nonsense that we've seen in the last years. Nothing to do with financial capitalism. It is productive capital. Now, what you have, the two prime factors of production are nature, land, natural resources, that's one, and labor, your exertion. And what is the economy there? The economy is there for the satisfaction of our desires and our basic needs. And if that is forgotten, forget it. We are now slaves to money. We are now slaves to finance. We are now slaves to some weird, again, this zombie kind of concept, machine capitalism. But it should be the other way around. The economy should serve us, the people. Money should facilitate the economy to serve us, the people.
The robots have learned how to pay our elected officials, and they've done that, and they have steered the emphasis away from us, because the robot has taken control, is really what's happened here. The corporate robot has acquired the ability 24 hours a day to subvert our system, and they've done it very, very well. And we have to applaud them for a fantastic job of destroying our country.
For snow job. And we have
snow job.
Henry George said we have, or Dan Sullivan actually, paraphrasing Henry George, they're stealing our land from us, they stole our land from us, and now they're giving it back to us at rent. We have to pay the rent. They're stealing our money, and then now lending it back to us at interest.
But what about buying capital based on the earnings of future capital, the way corporate financing does it? Is there some way, or maybe, let's just speculate, if technology is growing so powerful and the workload is shifting to the machines, isn't ownership of the machines the most important thing? And could it be that if more ownership was diversified in corporations, they too would survive? Because I see a lot of cheating that's going on in
corporations. Henry George would say taxation. Tax these successful monopolists and eliminate the excessive profitability and apply that to the people who have been deprived of the opportunity as a result, right?
Absolutely.
But then who's ever owning the taxes? Like there's something called, Walter Burian has a certified financial report where he's showing that the wealth of assets is enormous, and politicians who know about it, they're puppet masters. They know it would be doomed for their career to mention it, but that our little puny taxes that are crushing to us doesn't really account for the real wealth.
But we're standing reality on its head. Think about, we have 6.7 billion people, let's say. 6.7 billion people have, let's talk about primal needs. Air, water, food, shelter, and clothing. Let's stay very simple. To satisfy these needs, we have the technology, we have the productive capacity, we're not distributing it correctly.
Design.
We have 1/3 of the world population, according to United Nations estimates, is still on poverty line. They don't have clean water. They're starving. They're basically subsistence. They're starving. They're on the verge of starving to death.
Right.
That is a shame not for the nation, for the world.
For the world.
Because it needs not to be done, because we have the productive capacities to take care of it. Let's take care of that first. Let's worry about these financial wizards. Let them take care of themselves. Let's worry about this afterwards. The primary needs have to be covered first. Right now, it's not a question of what bank, how much good money we can throw after bad money. The question is, how can we get the unemployed off the street? How can we get them back to work?
Here's the simple solution. There's really just one solution.
Tell me.
Let me ask you, what do you think the solution is? And I'll tell you what it is. It's an obvious solution.
You tell us first, and we tell you ours.
People connect to each other, the jobs and the taxes.
There's something that you need to do. One thing only, and that is to provide for government taxpayer financing of elections, period. That will cure all. That's your biggest problem here.
So it's not the rich men alone
They can't buy the government any longer. You got to have taxpayer financing of elections. If it costs 5% of the economy to elect our officials, imagine the growth in the other 95%. It's worth it. It's not wrong to have a public financing of elections. You've got to eliminate the private financing because they buy the government.
You can't, I mean, nowadays you have this thing is, why can't Honest Abe from Illinois not come to go to Washington? Mr. Smith go to Washington. Honest Abe go to Washington. Why not? Because where does he get the dough
That's
to do
right.
that?
So we need, and I have a proposal, I have a petition available on internet to provide that in New York City, that all elections for candidates from New York City be financed, and I've broken it down into the stages. Trying to get a nomination, if you haven't succeeded, trying to compete in a primary, and then running for election, all of that has to be financed by government.
Are you saying that it's not a coincidence that Bloomberg is the richest man in the city?
That is correct. And you see what they used to do. Here's what they used to do.
I'm surprised.
Here's what they did. The rich used to hide behind their money and appoint somebody to run for office for them. Now they don't bother anymore. They use their money unashamedly.
Okay, but this is why I'm saying I was so pleased when Lady Fiona came on my show, because I honestly think there's a lot of wealthy people of good, because I've talked about this to Robert Ashford, and he thinks that there's about 10% of the people that really love being rich because people are poor, and there's 10% at the other end that would do anything they can to be equitable, give everything they have away, and everybody in the middle just wants you to make them a deal they can't refuse, that give me a reasonable idea. I honestly think this Malthusianism cannot be underestimated. If people really believe that we have too many people and there isn't enough to go around.
Can I just do that in 1 minute? What's wrong with Malthus? Malthus says population will always outrun subsistence. In other words, you have more people propagate and become so numerous that the world can't feed them anymore. That's a very simple Malthusian premise. Right. Now, Henry George says that it's correct as a special case. It's not a general case. The special case being that land and resources are held in private hands. If you have absolute resources monopolization, of course, the multitudes are going to be crammed on some small space. Malthus did not think it was possible to feed 1 billion people, 1 billion. We have 6.7 right now. So each one of us sitting here at the table, everyone watching the show, is a living proof of the falsity and the fallacy of Malthus' ideas.
Right.
So if you spread the resources, if you give access to natural opportunities and to resources, then you don't have this problem.
And technologies are improving, and also we're looking at ancient wisdoms too. At the La Casa de Spa, we had a master who's been studied in the laboratories, living on sunlight. So we need to balance our potential so that we can unfold and reconsider what in the past we thought was impossible.
And get rid of the notion that we live forever, because Mother Nature balances off through hurricanes and floods and other disasters and diseases and whatever. Mother Nature balances off.
Speaking of nature, Mother Nature balancing, Jane Goldberg is writing a book on radiation hormesis, and it turns out that we are starved for natural radiation coming off rocks, and we have these ridiculous standards of what's dangerous, and if you went by those standards, you'd have to pull down Grand Central Station or anything with granite in it. And it turns out it's healing cancer, and there have been a few scientists who have been able to maintain this true knowledge, and they've been so frustrated that the media hasn't gotten it right, and it usually confuses people with fear. So it's not only overpopulation, it's radiation, and they measured Hiroshima and Nagasaki 2 weeks after the bomb. It wasn't like what we thought. And the people are living longer, and the cows they had to euthanize.
Let me add that one big comment here.
That's what I meant about knowledge being a resource and access to knowledge.
Here's more knowledge. That the money used in campaigns is essentially being used for the media that we as the people own. Radio, television, cable. So that there is really no expense of running a campaign. We don't really have to pay a goddamn penny. We could just require that the media that is licensed, the right to use the broadcast media or cable that's licensed by government, must be used in order to support government in the sense of campaign financing. So there's no money involved, really.
That's what I mean, Carl. It's like waking up from a bad dream. What is this phenomenon of people waking up to see that? It's like we're talking about the franchise happening with MNN and the cable. I think MNN right now, you can see the way the internet's going and the way YouTube finally did that final, news poll that you can't even object when a video is taken down. I think MNN now is so precious, just like a book. He said it by hand. We come here, we work with each other, we produce these shows, we get information out. We have people walk up on the street to us to say they've enjoyed the show. Each person that walks up, they're so impressed that I'm so thankful. But it gives me feedback, and it makes me know that the electricity is flowing, the connection is being made, that maybe in that way we can accomplish what you're talking about with, the elections and so on.
No.
Because people didn't know that we didn't own the media. They don't know the media comes from us.
Controlling information, absolute control of information is like an absolute control of the air that you need to breathe. I mean, if we as a society cannot survive unless we have a free flow of information. So if the flow of information is controlled by Murdoch or by whomsoever, who has his little agenda, but he doesn't have the global agenda that is really needed to be served. So
you're absolutely correct, because the power to define, as far as I'm concerned, is the greatest power on earth. Once I begin to define, and you buy into the ideology of progress, the ideology of race, the ideology of anti-Semitism, ideology of whatever, that's when the control sets in. And since most of us
But we control ourselves with our own fear. Is there something
No, but that fear is built in. But those fears are built in. We go through all kinds of stuff to create fear. Babies don't just come here fearful. Babies don't come into the world fearful.
No.
We create fear.
They cry a lot, though.
And I love to hear crying. That's natural. You better get them crying. If you're not crying, you shake it to see what's wrong. Lungs are not developing. It's just that, the madness has been here so long that we no longer recognize that it's happening. But there are forces in the universe that over time that have created the way we think and control and direct what we think, what we eat, what we do. It's not always our decision making. And we say, well, I'm free to do this, I'm free to do that. I'm free to starve to death, I'm free to freeze to death, and be homeless. I'm free to do all kinds of stuff. If you really believe that, then I think we need to recheck our heads.
So it was life, liberty, and property. It wasn't life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And it should be, thank you, it should not
liberty?
be just life, liberty,
and the pursuit of happiness.
And land, access to land. That's what has to be added to the Constitution, what has to be added to the Declaration of Independence.
I would say from my spiritual studies that the Henry George concern with land would be a very important aspect of creation, the earth element.
Sure.
But there's also water and fire and
land in the
land owns those things.
In the overall, it includes all that.
In the old language, land meant everything. It meant air. Natural resources. Land was a code for natural resources.
Real property.
Here was how I was a little frustrated at St. Mark's when you had the presenter that we couldn't continue or go deeper when you were speaking about, you said all great fortunes came from, what did you say?
Well, from violations of law. Because they achieve an excessive return, which in a competitive way would draw everyone else in. But when it's illegal, the others don't also sell drugs. The laws stop them. So huge fortunes are made by violating the law and getting away with it.
They said they had laws against the slavery too at the beginning.
Did you know
that? That's why the slave ships and the funding of it was such a concern, and that's why the anti-Semitism, because they were pointing out whatever Jew means, they were saying this was the group that was financing these ships that were not wanted to be bringing back.
I think we need to look at that because what happens is that you have royal colonies. And certainly they're not Jews. The Jews, they might have made some deal with somebody, but they're royal colonies. And then you have, what he said to them, private colonies.
No, it took capital to get the boats over.
No, but I'm going back, though. So we began the royal colonies. So there's royal stuff going out here financed through the kingdoms, all right? Then there is financing, especially, and I think people are referring to the Dutch houses. And the Dutch houses are largely Jewish owned. And so people are going there and they're getting that capital through the Dutch houses. And they happen to be the biggest of the houses. And I think that's what you're getting at. If you look at who owns them.
It's the envy syndrome.
Carl, we know drugs is illegal, but was slavery
Let me give you
illegal?
an example. I've got a very good example here. Take the 12 largest fortunes in the world. 25% of them came from one corporation. What was that one corporation? Walmart.
Really?
Yes. Just announced today in the press.
This is the recent ownership.
Well, it's not
there's
recent.
No drugs and slavery with Walmart.
Well, see, now if you
economic slavery,
if you follow what I've been saying, and that is that every great fortune is based on a violation of law.
Can I chime in on that? Henry George's definition of real property is conquest, force, and fraud.
Yeah.
Conquest, force,
so
and fraud.
So here's the violation of law, and the reason that they got away with it is that we have bought off our enforcement officials, so that people can violate the law. That's what's happened. That's why you need enforcement of the antitrust laws. Walmart buys its goods at 1/2 the manufacturer's cost, and the competitors buy at 50% above cost. That means that Walmart buys at 1/3 the cost of its competitor across the street, drives them out of business, and once they're out of business, Walmart obviously marks up the price appropriately because it's now a monopolist for that product.
That's a classic way of creating a monopoly.
Exactly.
It's a classic, It's a case study.
25% of the top 12 billionaires in the world stem from one company.
These are individual wealth we're talking about now.
They're the daughters of Sam Walton.
Yeah, but we're not talking about family wealth here now. We're talking about DuPont and Mellon and Rockefeller, whose ownership we don't know.
What's one corporation?
Right, it certainly has more than corporation.
Sam's Club, Walmart, one corporation. It got its run with Nixon. It started really with Nixon saying don't enforce the law, and it continued thereafter. They found a way.
Before or after Watergate?
It was before Watergate.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, before.
Don't enforce the law.
Open the gate and let the water run in.
In 1969, the Nixon administration came in. I became an antitrust lawyer in 1970, so I've been watching all of this as the field is declining. As antitrust law is declining, I see the country, I see the rich getting richer, I see the middle class getting destroyed, I see jobs going overseas, I see a dismantling of America, all because we don't enforce our antitrust laws. So we're in the same...
And then Clinton comes along and takes away all enforcement.
And don't you agree? Doesn't that sound...
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense. I've been watching this thing and writing about it. What we need to have is a forum on how we can create this, some method of getting this information to the people.
I think that it has to be some type of website that as people participate in it, they own it. I think it has to be something like that.
Participatory information.
Yeah, because
the SEC laws that if you haven't... I tried issuing shares in a free thing one time, and the SEC leaped all over me. They really leaped all over me, and I had to withdraw that. It was just free, and there was no money connected
Well,
with
let's
it.
figure out some way
Yeah.
around it, because in Canada, you can buy shares of a cow in order to get around the raw milk laws. You know, you're not. It's like illegal to get raw milk. So they put this guy's 20 counts against him, and this is why I like the royal family, because the Queen drinks raw milk. So if you make the royal family wrong, then you don't have to deal with the fact that they may be nourishing themselves better, and then observe that. Right now, upper New York, upstate New York, should have dairy farms. It's a natural place for dairy farms. You shouldn't have them being put in these factories down in Arizona eating corn, and then the people in upstate New York are going in to become guards in prisons.
I've got an
Prisons are
idea.
growing as an industry.
Yes, since the early 80s, yes.
Here's an idea, and that
Construction
is
of
that
upstate dairy farms.
in the same way that we have a political process where people are involved in gathering donations and service contributions, we could have the same thing directed towards building a website and getting people into that website, some kind of a mechanism like moveon.org, but directed to a website that would do what we're thinking of.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. So thank you for joining me on this excursion farther down the rabbit hole, and I hope to have you all back in the future so we can develop these topics more.
That was
Thank
fun.
you for letting
Thank
us
you.
communicate with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a lot of fun.
I would
I
like
want to say that we have got to first talk about a literate society, because there's
A literate
a literate society.
Literate.
We do not have a literate society.